History is like a giant jigsaw puzzle, with countless pieces still missing. Archaeologists are the tireless detectives who uncover those lost fragments, each one with the power to transform our understanding of the world that came before us. Join us as we reveal the groundbreaking discoveries that are rewriting the history books. Prepare to see vanished cultures, mysterious structures, and enigmatic artifacts that demand new explanations.
We're starting things off with the discovery of possibly the oldest art in the world. Now, the common belief is that Homo sapiens were the first human species to create art, but a finding in 2014 showed that that may not have been the case at all. Archaeologists may have found ancient art created by not our species, but by our distant ancestor, Homo erectus. Previously, we thought that the earliest evidence of sophisticated art dated back around 70 to 100,000 years ago, crafted by Homo sapiens. But in 2014, a shell engraved with geometric patterns was discovered in a riverbank in Indonesia. It was dated to be at least 430,000 years old and believed to have been made by Homo erectus. So Homo erectus was never thought to have been artistic in any way. Now, am I saying the art on this shell was like a breathtaking piece? No, I mean, it zigzags etched into a shell, but it's pretty cool that this may have been created by an extinct species of human. This pushes back the timeline for complex cognitive abilities much further than we thought before, and it changes the idea that modern human behavior, in this case artistic expression and abstract thought, just suddenly came about in a burst of evolutionary innovation around 100 to 200,000 years ago. Instead, it looks like some of what we consider modern may have been around in our ancestors hundreds of thousands of years earlier. And speaking of extinct human species, there are also recent findings that point to Homo naledi possibly being more intelligent than we thought and doing stuff like burying their dead. Originally discovered in a South African cave system, these 300,000-year-old hominins were thought to have had a mix of human and pre-human features, but not much else. But recent evidence points to them having possibly been way more complex than we thought before. There's evidence that Homo naledi may have intentionally buried their dead. The idea has always been that only modern humans did that. Even more interesting are the engravings found on cave walls. Now, the age of the marks hasn't been determined to a T. If they were created by Homo naledi, it would mean they would have a level of artistic expression and brain power that, once again, we thought was unique to Homo sapiens. Now, to be fair, Homo naledi had very small brains, so that's not just us being arrogant. It makes sense that we always thought they were just kind of dumb apes. Next up, we have new revelations about the hunting practices of foraging societies. So here's what we've always been taught in school, right? The men in ancient tribes would always be the ones out hunting while the women stayed home. And it turns out that may not be the case. Now, while it is true that men would have been hunting the majority of the time, there's recent evidence that points to women having hunted in about 80% of foraging societies around the world. And in a third of those societies, women were even taking down big game. So this particular finding started with a comprehensive review led by Carl Well Scheffler at the University of Washington, who delved deep into over 1,400 human societies worldwide, spanning over 150 years of studies. Now, as for why we haven't really heard much about this before, it seems there's just been a bit of a bias. The idea that men are the hunters and women stick to gathering has been so ingrained in our minds that it's just always how evidence has been interpreted. But now with this wealth of data, it's becoming more clear that women have been active participants in the hunt all along. What's also really fascinating is how flexible women's hunting strategies were. They weren't confined to one tool or method. They were using bows and arrows, knives, nets, spears, and in some cases, they were even hunting with their young strapped to their backs. Next up, we have a discovery made in 2023 of a very old Viking burial, really changing our understanding of Scandinavian history. So this mound, known as Herlogshaugen, was believed to be a typical Viking Age burial site, but turns out there's more to it than that. Surveys of the mound uncovered large rivets, which confirmed that this was the site of a ship burial. Now, that's not surprising on its own. Cool, but not surprising. This is Scandinavia, after all. What is surprising, though, is the date. It was dated to around 700 AD, which predates the Viking Age by several decades. This makes Harlashagen the oldest known ship burial in Scandinavia, and it means that the tradition of burying people in large ships began much earlier than historians once thought. It also shows that the maritime skills and technology of the region were more advanced than we thought before as well, even before the Viking Age. Next on the list we have the Diary of Memor. It used to be a pretty common belief that the Great Pyramids were built by slaves, being yelled at and whipped as they uncomfortably hauled massive mounds of limestone, but this version of events may not be accurate, and it all changed with the discovery of the Diary of Memor, an ancient papyrus with details about how the ancient Egyptians built these structures and the lives of the workers who built them. Memor was an official who oversaw a team responsible for transporting limestone blocks from quarries to the construction site of the Great Pyramid of Giza. His diary, dated to around 4,500 years ago, had all these meticulous details of the daily operations involved in this construction. What's surprising is that Memor's diary mentions the workers being well fed and cared for, contradicting that image we have of brutal slavery often thought to be the case. Instead of slaves, it looks like the builders were skilled laborers and may have actually been compensated for their work. So there you go. Now you can rest easy at night knowing one of the 7 wonders of the world was built in an ethical way. Unless he was just lying in all those writings to make it all look better for like people discovering it in the future, you know? News of this next archaeological breakthrough was just released in 2023, and for those of you not keeping track of time, that's last year. So, human fossils were found in the Tampa Ling cave in Laos that may change researchers' understanding of human migration into Australia. These fossils were found buried deep in the cave's sediment layers, giving us very important evidence that links the journey of early humans from Africa through Southeast Asia and eventually into Australia. The common belief has always been that human migration happened mostly through sea routes, but these human remains were found in a cave 186 miles inland in 2009, so that had scientists second guessing things. Using luminescence dating techniques, researchers were able to figure out a timeline, revealing the oldest fossils could have been between 68 and 86,000 years old, which pushes back the estimated arrival of humans in Southeast Asia by quite a bit. The findings could also mean that modern humans likely traveled through forested areas, possibly following river valleys on their journey from Africa to Asia and eventually to Australia. Were all the high-ranking members of society in ancient Europe always men? History has always taught us that was the case, but it turns out that Bronze Age Spain may have had women in powerful positions. Back in 2021, a pretty cool discovery was made in Spain. The discovery was of a woman's remains, and it looked like she'd been a ruling elite. Located beneath a Bronze Age ruin at a site in Murcia, Spain, the woman had been buried along with valuable objects like a rare silver crown. There were also the remains of a man buried along with her, and he didn't have anything cool on him. He was just a bunch of bones. This ruin was also found to have possibly been the earliest palace discovered in Western Europe from the Bronze Age. The crown wasn't the only evidence that this woman had been in a position of power. It was also the location of her burial. She'd been beneath a room with a large building complex that looked to have been both residential and political. Basically, the place could have been a palace. Next on the list, we have the bronze statues. So in 2022, statues dating back 2,300 years were discovered, and they were unlike anything seen before in Italy or even the Mediterranean. Led by archaeologist Jacob Taboli, the excavation team found 24 beautifully preserved bronze statues, including figures of gods like Hygeia and Apollo. They were also adorned with inscriptions honoring important Etruscan families. It looked as if the statues might have been submerged in the thermal waters as part of some religious ceremony, which helped keep them in such fantastic condition over the centuries that people of that time had been praying together and honoring their gods in these ancient baths. Now, what was fascinating about this discovery is that it looks like the Etruscans and Romans may have been closer than what we once thought. Next on the list we have the possible discovery, heavy emphasis on possible, the possible discovery of Amelia Earhart's plane. So you probably heard about this in the news about a month back. People are pretty excited about this one, and if it does turn out that Amelia Earhart's plane has been found, this will put an end to a decades-old mystery. A man named Tony Romeo, the CEO of Deep Sea Vision, led a team to the Pacific Ocean close to Howland Island, where they captured sonar images using an underwater drone. They scanned 5,200 square miles of the ocean floor, and they captured what looks to be an aircraft looking similar to Amelia Earhart's Lockheed 10E Electra. Now, some say the wings, or what look like wings in the sonar image, look different than Earhart's plane. They're kind of like backward. And sure, there's totally a chance this is a different aircraft, but the wings could have also been damaged, and that's why they look to be bent back like that. At this point, we really don't know, but there's going to be an expedition later this year to see if this really is her plane. So we just gotta hold out for a little while. And we're finishing off today's list with a pretty incredible discovery made in Brazil. It all started in 2019 when a team of archaeologists were called in to inspect what seemed like a routine construction project at an apartment complex. But as they dug deeper, they stumbled on human bones along with this trove of ancient relics. And it all dated back thousands of years, some as far as 9,000. And there were over 100,000 artifacts in total, along with 43 human skeletons. And what was also really interesting is that these findings spanned layers of history. Each layer was a different civilization that once lived in the region. About 6.5 feet below the surface, archaeologists discovered remnants of a group that existed around 8,000 to 9,000 years ago, and this was incredibly interesting because it pushed back the timeline of humans settling in Brazil by quite a bit. The team's been working for 4 years at the site, and this finding could rewrite history, changing what anthropologists used to believe about when humans migrated into the Americas from Asia.
At number 10, we have King Henry IV's head. I want to be such a badass in my life that when I die, people put in such an effort to make sure I stay dead. Either that or they do some sort of Weekend at Bernie's situation with strings on me and I'm dancing around. Well, when King Henry IV was assassinated, they cut off his head and buried it in another location. The location was a mystery to everyone until 2010 when it was found in some tax collector's attic. The dude had a 17th century cranium stored up there like old baby pictures. This guy bought it off an elderly couple. The elderly couple snagged the head in an auction in the late 19th century. Okay, I want to add to what I want to live like. I want to be such an awesome person in my life that people are selling my body parts off at an auction. It'll be like, next up, we got Che Dorena's prize scrotum. It said that if you pull off one of the hairs, any wish will come true.
Coming in at number 9 is the tiny alien, and yes, I found this one after pulling one of those scrotum hairs and wishing on it. Honestly, I don't even know with this one. So back in 2003 in the Atacama Desert of Chile, archaeologists found a 6-inch tall mummified skeleton with a pointed head. And if you see the picture of this thing, it's actually tiny, like it's the size of my foot more or less, and now I can't tell if I've exposed that my feet are big or that this thing was tiny. My feet are normal sized, I swear. Either way, after close examination, researchers found the skeleton to have the bone density of a 6-year-old kid despite its miniature size. Even scientists were like, could this be our first ever alien specimen? Sadly not. After more and more thorough investigation, they found out the skeleton was in fact human after all, probably related to the indigenous Chileans. There were 7 different mutations in her growth genes, which most likely explains her overall smallness, but it is a sight to see. Honestly, I've never seen a skull shaped like that, and I'm not throwing shade at all. It's interesting.
Alright, your favorite host is back, or back with number 8, head on a stick. Way back in the day when we were still swinging around clubs and we didn't really know what to do with dead bodies, cremating someone and then throwing their ashes over the parking lot at Cheesecake Factory by their request is a very new thing. Well, these Stone Age dudes thought taking heads and mounting them on sticks was the best course of action. An archaeological dig in Sweden found a bunch of heads mounted on sticks that dated back way before the Greeks were laying around with rock hard abs. It's unknown why these cavemen decided to shish kebab these skulls. They might have been enemies, and mounting the heads to sticks could have been a warning to other people not to come around or you're gonna end up like this head on a stick. Or it could have been a nice thing. Maybe when your buddy dies, you put his head on a stick so you can bring him around and give him little forehead kisses forever. It did seem like some sort of ritual, because where they found the mounted heads, there were loads of animal bones scattered everywhere.
Filling our number 7 slot is the Apple Store, and no, I'm not about to mention the 13th century Apple Store that archaeologists randomly found, and with it the iPhone minus 10C or X or whatever you want to call it. So basically back in 2013 the company was breaking ground in Madrid in order to build another Apple Store because clearly they thought they didn't have enough. While construction crew were excavating the area, they found the remnants of a 15th century hospital just casually. The hospital was in use way back in the 1400s and treated victims of the plague. It was demolished in 1854 and sealed below the street until the Apple Store came along. When asked about the situation, Apple said they want to incorporate the ruins of the hospital into the glass box store design, so if you walk into the Madrid store you'll find the iPhones on your left, earpods on your right, and the hospital ruins and corpses way at the back. Do ask for assistance from an employee if need be. And I am your favorite host.
Back again, guys, with number 6, smallpox scabs. You go to the library and you try to make your brain smarter, and then the only thing that happens is you come in contact with an ancient disease. You pause your Netflix and pick up books only to get punished for it. This is like when there was E. coli in the romaine lettuce. Well, in 2003, Suzanne Caro went to check out some books at the Santa Fe College Library. She picked out some old Civil War books because she's a fun time, and in the book there was an envelope. Because she's a curious little devil, she decided to open them up and found a bunch of scabs. Scabs in an envelope? Must be my birthday. She found out by reading this old-timey book that the scabs were taking off patients with smallpox during the Civil War. So she kept them, then dipped them in chocolate and served them to her friends at a dinner party. I'm just kidding, guys. She called the Center for Disease Control because she's not as imaginative as I am.
Coming in at number 5 is the letter. During the demolition of a fireplace in a house located in Caversham, builder Lewis Shaw found a letter. The letter was written sometime in the 40s by a little boy called David. I know you were hoping it was like some sort of murder confession letter or a steamy cheating confession, but alas, it was just a letter to Santa Claus. In it, he wrote, "Dear Father Christmas," that was quite formal. Anyway, "Dear Father Christmas, please can you send me a rupee annual and a drum box of chalks, soldiers and Indians, slippers and any little toys you have to spare. Love, David." Well, any little toys you have to spare, how cute is that? Like, mate, he has a factory run by elves, he has more than a little to spare. Lewis really wanted to track David down to give him the letter, so he actually made a hashtag Find David media campaign and actually managed to find him alive and well. The internet. There you go. You'd assume David would have been like, "Bro, I wrote this 60 years ago, you think I care now?" But he was actually quite surprised and found it quite cute considering his kids now either asking for a motorbike or a bunch of Barbies. Chalk and slippers just won't cut it in this day and age, David. Get with it.
At number 4 on the list, we have the Essex Sarcophagus. As Stephen Drake was checking out an old home in the middle of being touched up, while walking through he came to a big gap in the wall. He decided to peek through. Now if this was a horror movie, this would be the point where something jumps into his eye and sucks out his brain. But instead of having his brain sucked out, he found a 3,000-year-old sarcophagus that was left there by the previous owner. The guy who used to own the home was now dead, so Stephen took the sarcophagus to get carbon dated, and it turns out the thing was legit. I hope Stephen got a fat payday for that. Some weird stuff about this is no one knows where the dead owner got this thing from, and there also was no body inside the sarcophagus, so no one knows where the mummy body went.
Filling our number 3 slot is the baby. I can't even wrap my head around why someone would even do this or how they would do it, but here we go. Back in 1850, a Parisian couple were getting some work done on their home. Workers came in and started digging up the floor and walls, and a mummified baby just fell out of the wall. Legit, they were probably like, "Is this yours?" Obviously the couple was suspected of killing the baby right away, but they were quickly exonerated. The doctor used changes in corpses and flies to determine they didn't do it. First off, how on earth do you put a baby dead or alive in a wall? Forget dead, how do you have the heart to put a live baby in a wall and board it back up? Secondly, how are flies good murder conviction evidence? Like, am I the only one that thinks this is sus? This is sus, guys. And sadly enough, cases of mummified babies are so common even now. I mean, 2 were found in 2007, and those are just the 2 that I know of. I'm sure if I researched it more, I'd find a bunch. This just hurts my heart, I'm sorry. Che's here for comic relief, and I'm here for the morbid stories.
Hey guys, I'm back to bring a smile to your face after Eamon bummed you out. On number 2 we have the mass grave of Tomb, County Galway. Okay, maybe I'm gonna bum you out too. In an archaeological dig, I bet you want to find like dinosaur bones or old weaponry, maybe even some fossilized dinosaur poop. That's a real thing, you should look it up. Underneath the former home for single mothers in Tomb, County Ireland was the remains of 796 babies. What the hell? It was a super baby grave. This is like something that came out of a Rob Zombie movie. Like it's literally almost House of a Thousand Corpses. Between the years of 1925 and 1961, the home was run by the Bon Secours nuns, and it was a place where single mothers could go to get support. However, the nuns would often neglect the children which they were left to take care of. This would lead to them dying, and then they would wrap them in a sheet and dump their bodies in a septic tank. When the discovery was made, a home was built over top of the burial site to pay homage to the infants. That was so chilling, I never want to think about it again. Now we gotta go back to Amen. Oof.
Hi guys, I'm back. Hopefully you don't find me as dull as Che thinks you do. And finally at number 1 is post-death partum. So yeah, you probably do find me as dull as Che thinks you do. Once upon a time, 1,300 years ago, in a small Italian town of Imola, a woman died. And that's the end of number 1. No, I'm kidding. Archaeologists found said woman in 2010 and the skeletal remains seemed odd. Her skeleton was fine, but archaeologists found a strange cluster of tiny bones in between her legs, which obviously turned out to be the remains of her fetus that she somehow gave birth to after her death. If we investigate this further CSI style, she was buried face up, so that implied she was purposely buried. She was in her late 20s, early 30s, and her baby was only 2 weeks away from being full term. The baby's legs were still inside the mum, but their head and upper body was born after she died, and that's referred to as a coffin birth. Did you guys know that was a thing? Because I certainly did not know that was a thing. What happens is that gas builds up inside the dead woman, which pushes the fetus out of the birth canal, something that has rarely ever been seen in archaeological history. And that's not even the end of it. They also found a hole drilled into the woman's skull, which is common back then to relieve things like head injuries, headaches, or to get rid of evil spirits. If any of you need that treatment after listening to Che, hit me up.
At number 10 we have a pit full of arms. I don't think anything nice was ever found at the bottom of a pit. No one has gone to the base of a pit and found a PlayStation 5 with The Last of Us 3. It's almost always death, and this pit was no different. Some archaeologists in France came across a super deep pit. Like if you fell in it you would die 100% of the time. There's no way you're sticking that landing, not at all. So it makes sense at the bottom of this pit they found a bunch of skeletons from people who had been thrown into the pit. It was Death Pit, which is the name of the metal band I'm going to start after this video. Now the thing that was so shocking about the bodies that were thrown into this pit of despair is what happened to the bodies before they were thrown into the pit. All the people had their arms chopped off and their skulls bashed in. Like, you're already going to throw the people to their death. Why would you mutilate their bodies before you chuck them in? The pit was literally layered. At the bottom layer was all arms and the top layer was all bodies that had their heads smashed in. Like some sort of sick cake. Who would do such a thing? Well, the bodies were dated back to 4000 BC, so their motivations were very unknown, but it's probably just because they were cavemen. At number 9 we have the Black Sarcophagus. This is my problem with archaeologists. They're always digging around finding things that maybe don't want to be found. Maybe something was buried 20 feet underground because it was never supposed to be opened ever again, like the Black Sarcophagus. This thing was dug up in 2018 and right away people were saying that this thing was cursed. It got posted all over the internet and it spread around like a mid-tier meme. Like, you know, the kind of meme that lasts for like 2 or 3 weeks at best. Like when you look at it you just blow air out of your nose and then move on. Like that kind of meme. It wasn't great. Well, everyone said that this thing was going to rain fire from the sky if it was ever opened. I mean, and it does look like something pulled right out of a movie. And guess what the archaeologists did anyways? They opened it. Oh, this creepy box that might kill everyone? Let's just open it just in case. There might be a boat in there, who knows? Now, nothing can be connected directly to the sarcophagus, but remember how much people were complaining about 2019 and saying a bunch of bad stuff happened? Coincidence? I think not. At number 8 we have head on your chest. How do you want to die? This might be something you want to pick because it's the only thing in life that you can guarantee. I want to die on TV saying something cool, so my death quote gets turned into a meme like 100 times. It's like all over the internet. I want my death to be turned into like an Infinity War level meme, like a huge level meme. Also, side note, Thanos did nothing wrong. But I don't think that these guys got to pick their death. There were some weird bodies that were discovered in England. They were dated back to the 14th century. The weird thing about these bodies is that they were all buried laying flat with their heads propped up on their chest like they were holding a basketball, which means that someone was chopping off these dudes' heads before before they sent them into the ground. Not the most fun way to die, but at least they got to keep their head. They didn't start kicking it around like a soccer ball or something. If I was one of the guys in charge, I would bury them, but I would switch their heads around so the person finding them would have to do a match game to match up the right heads. At number 7, we have puzzle time. Did you know that if you throw a person's body into a bog and it's cold enough, it will help preserve the body? Well, I didn't know this either until I started making this list. Well, there was a dude in Scotland who found some bodies that had been buried for hundreds of years, but it seemed like before they were buried, someone had been doing some bog therapy on them to keep them in a preserved state. This is slightly creepy, but let's kick it up a notch. There were 2 bodies found, a man and a woman. Both of their bodies were very strange. There were limbs and body parts that seemed to be too large for their frame, almost like it was some sort of mutation. Everyone was confused. Well, thanks to the magic of DNA, the people digging up these bodies were able to find out that this happened because someone had been taking different body parts from several dead bodies and assembling them to make some sort of creation. Very creepy. And some of the mismatched body parts were hundreds of years older than the others. How did someone find bodies that were hundreds of years old, and why did they try to attach them to other people's bodies? That's something we will never know. At number 6, we have the cheese. Usually people digging around in Egypt want to find a gold tomb that is filled with guys wrapped in toilet paper. But every now and again you find something a little more strange. A tomb in Egypt had a little snack inside waiting to be dug up. Why would this be on a list of scary things? Well, because the cheese was over 3,000 years old and was packed with some unknown bacteria. If someone was dumb enough to bite into this cheese, they could unleash a plague that could wipe out humanity as we know it. Death would sweep through the world and ravage every last man, woman, and child. There would be nowhere on earth that you would be able to be safe from the terrors of this bloody cheese. People would become cheese monsters, like all the creatures that walk around in The Last of Us, except they would smell like Parmesan. Well, either that or the dude would just get the worst diarrhea of his life, like poop water for like 8 weeks straight or something. Really, either is possible when you weigh it out. At number 5, we have Wolverine-ish. For this next one, it really depends on what part of the story you look at to whether or not this will be a nightmare to you. So in Italy, a body was found from someone who seemed to be from the 8th century. He was a pretty old dude, and this guy had his arm chopped off right above the elbow. Now that is the scary part, someone amputating part of your body. No one wants to have their arm chopped off at any joint. But in place of his missing forearm was a big knife. This guy had a stump, and then at the end of it was an engineered prosthetic that had a knife on it. He had a knife hand, which I think is cool as hell. This guy could be walking around in the year 800 punch stabbing people like a G. Punch stab, punch stab, punch stab, punch stab, punch stab. This guy's cool as hell. But I can understand why that would scare people, because you never want to be on the bad end of a guy punch stabbing you. At number 4, we have a gnawing sensation. The body of a Roman woman had a little surprise in her nether regions, and let me tell you, it was not a sexy one. Not everything below the belt gets hot. In fact, this was one of the most gross things that has ever been discovered, and I never want to come in contact with anything like this ever again. Well, this lady was found with a tumor in her pelvis. What was crazy about it is that the tumor was caused by an infected egg inside of her womb. This would cause the egg to partially develop, and the tumor had teeth in it. Ugh. That sounds like something that should be pulled out of a horror movie. The living tumor that has come to take over your planet. You will all be slaves to this toothy monster. Because this lady happened to die before x-rays were even a concept, there's a good chance she had no idea what dental danger was inside her body. At number 3, we have vampires. As much as we complain about the world, it's nice to know that things used to be way worse. Like maybe you don't like your job, or maybe you were stuck in traffic, or maybe you even got dumped. But at least you weren't tortured to death because people thought you were a vampire. A tomb in Bulgaria uncovered a man from the 1200s who seemed to be horribly murdered, most likely by people who thought he was some sort of vampiric monster. It seemed that he was forced into a grave, and then someone took a bladed weapon to his leg and hacked it off. And because the only way to kill a vampire is to stab it through its heart, they hammered a steel stake through this dude's chest, pinning him to his own grave. Joke's on them, you have to use a wooden stake, so this guy rose from the dead to seek revenge. Just kidding, he died for sure. He was for sure dead. At number 2, we have Pit of Sorrow. Something this list has taught me is that things have definitely got nicer over time. I know the world isn't perfect, but this next point shows how commonplace brutality used to be. There was a pit found in Austria that had an entire tribe of people in it. 94 bodies were found, and they were all dated back to 5200 BC. Now, how did all these people from the tribe die in the same place? Well, they were attacked and from the looks of it, it seemed like the opposing tribe came in to wipe them all out. Everyone in the pit had their head cracked open and then had their knees and legs snapped, and some of them had arrowheads lodged in their backs. The thing that sent this over the edge is that 27 of the 94 bodies were children. This tribe, the attacking tribe, made sure that everyone was dead except for women. There were only 2 female bodies found in the gravesite, so this most likely means that the women were all taken into slavery. Alright, for the number 1 spot, we have some hidden tunnels that were dug up in Chavinduantar in Peru. The tunnels zigzagged into all sorts of hidden rooms that could have been used as some sort of hiding place or escape route from invading tribes, but it seemed that the main thing that the tunnels were used for was sacrificing people in rituals. Several bodies were discovered that were dismembered in all sorts of strange ways. They would be strapped down to altars and then mutilated to death. Some of them had their heads chopped off, and others seemed to have their hearts pulled out of their chest while they were still alive. Imagine someone putting a bag over your head in the middle of the night and then dragging you to some horrible underground lair and then cutting your still beating heart out of your chest. That's one hell of a Friday night.
Starting us off in our number 10 spot, the Sumerian civilization. The ancient Sumerians were a group of people that suddenly became established in Mesopotamia circa 2900 BCE. No one is quite sure where they came from originally, but they believed and documented that their origins were not from planet Earth. According to ancient texts, the Sumerians were created by an alien race called the Anunnaki, who came to Earth after their planet Nibiru collided with another planet in the solar system. The aliens found themselves in short supply of gold, which they needed in their atmosphere, and saw that Earth was in high supply, so they landed here and created a new species that was half alien, half human to mine the gold for them. Now, it does sound a little crazy, but the Sumerians were real and they did have advanced scientific, agricultural, and technological knowledge, as well as an acute understanding of the solar system, which was highly advanced at their time. Researchers have recorded clay pot batteries that still contained electrodes, a flyable model airplane, as well as an unexplainable capability to cut large stones with exact precision. Not to mention that rockets, airplanes, and helicopters were all depicted on certain artifacts from the time too. Even stranger is that there is mitochondrial DNA evidence linked to a woman in Africa dating more than 100,000 years back near a gold mine. While of course we might never know for sure, the legend of the Anunnaki has made archaeologists question many things, and if it turns out to be true, it would certainly rewrite history.
The Baghdad Battery. The Baghdad Battery is a fascinating ancient artifact that was discovered in Iraq in 1936, consisting of a clay jar with a copper cylinder and an iron rod inside. While mainstream archaeologists consider it to be a simple vessel for storing scrolls or valuables, they're not 100% sure. So some folks have entertained a more exciting possibility. Enter the aliens. I think everything I picked has some sort of supposed alien connection, at least according to me, so prepare for that. Some hypothesize that this ancient relic is a sophisticated power device. According to some, ancient civilizations could have been far more advanced than we give them credit for, and they might have harnessed electricity for various purposes, but forget about human ingenuity. Maybe the Baghdad Battery was brought to the fine people of Earth with the assistance of a far more advanced species from outer space. Some believe that the ancient astronauts from other worlds visited Earth in the distant past and shared their knowledge of electricity with us. Maybe they left the Baghdad Battery as a small gift or a souvenir from their intergalactic journey, offering a glimpse into their advanced technology.
Number 8, a goddess. On the western coast of India, there are ruins of a temple to the goddess Patini. Now, that part alone is not unheard of, as temples and goddesses are a large part of Hinduism. However, what is out of the norm is they have found an underground secret chamber that's rumored to hold an underground shrine to the Egyptian goddess Isis. Now, the ruins are now owned by a Hindu temple and hence forbidden, so nobody's been able to check what's underneath them. But according to writer Mog Morgan, the idea that it is a secret shrine to the Egyptian goddess is very believable. He theorizes that an Egyptian traveler came to India and started a group dedicated to his own goddess, Isis, and that Patini could be the Indian evolution of the same deity. If only we could get into that chamber to know once and for all.
Next up, we have the Nazzal Lines. The Nazzal Lines are a series of ancient geoglyphs located in the Nazca Desert of southern Peru. They depict various shapes, including animals, plants, and geometric patterns, and the exact purpose and meaning of these etchings remains a bit of a mystery. Some theories suggest they might have been used for astronomical or religious purposes, but the strange thing is the scale of the designs means they can really only be appreciated from the air, and people weren't really looking down at the Earth 2,000 years ago. So who were these for? Were they used to appease gods, or maybe beings from outer space? There are all kinds of different images depicted, birds, monkeys, various different plants. Probably the strangest one though is what is often referred to by archaeologists as the astronaut. It's obviously a humanoid figure, but the size of the eyes and the shape of its body really does resemble some sort of spacesuit or classic extraterrestrial type being, so really leaves you with more questions than answers.
Coming in at number 6, Pudnamabaswamy Temple. In Kerala, India lies a grand temple containing 6 sealed underground vaults. Now, since its discovery, 5 of the vaults have actually been opened, and inside they found treasures, jewels, and gold worth millions. But there still remains one vault they have not been able to crack. In 2014, Supreme Court appointed committee members based on alleged mismanagement in the affairs of the temple were appointed to open the forbidden vault. First, they opened the metal grill door and discovered a sturdy wooden door just behind it. They opened this door as well and encountered a third door made of iron, which was jammed shut. The observers tried to force their way in, but failed. So they decided to hire a professional locksmith to open the door, but in mid-July, before the locksmith came, the royal family got an injunction from the Supreme Court against opening Vault B, and by July 2020, the Supreme Court refused to give permission to open the vault, as it was an issue involving religious sentiments. But it has left many wondering what is behind that last vault. Legend suggests that a spell is what is required to get open the last door, hence why the attempted prying methods used on the other 5 have been unsuccessful. But archaeologists are keen to hopefully one day be able to see what lies behind the sealed and forbidden vault.
Big circles. The big circles are mysterious archaeological features found in various locations across the Middle East. So these structures are massive circular shapes, visible only from above, and are made of stone walls or small stone mounds spread across different locations in the region, like Jordan, Syria, and Turkey. And they vary in size, with some stretching over 400 meters in diameter. But what were they built for? Nobody really knows. One of the most puzzling aspects of the big circles is their age, which is challenging to figure out without any artifacts connected with them or written records. Archaeologists have found it tough to date these structures accurately, leading to debates about their origins and the cultures that might have created them. Lots of theories have emerged in an attempt to unravel the purpose of these massive circles. Some researchers have put forward that the circles served as burial sites. Others speculate they may have been used to house animals, but the walls aren't really high enough for that. Most of them are only built like a few feet high. Of course, we have a bit of a similarity here to crop circles, and we all know the conspiracies surrounding them. So yeah, maybe, again, aliens, they could have a hand to play here too.
Next up at number 4, ape bones. At the Hill of Tara in Ireland, a set of strange bones were found, but they don't look like bones of a normal person. They belonged to an ape. And to make matters crazier, it's not even the only set of ape bones that have been found in Ireland. But the thing is, nobody knows how these apes managed to get there in the first place. And the only explanation is that someone, a long time ago, was taking apes up to Ireland and burying them there. One theory suggests that the apes might have been traded, but another theory is based on an Irish legend. The ancient legend claims that a group of strangers with magical powers came to Ireland on a massive ship and ruled the people from the Hill of Tara. Some think that the legend legend was based on a real event, and that the people they thought were magic were really a group of Egyptians with advanced technology. Now, this might seem a little out there, but despite that there are no native monkeys in Egypt itself, ancient Egyptians were incredibly familiar with monkeys, and they have held a permanent place in ancient Egyptian religion as one of the more important animal forms into which the gods might be transformed. On top of that, there's been actual DNA testing done on ancient Irish bodies that suggests they could have an ancestor from the Middle East. And near the hill of Tara, there are 3,800-year-old remains of a boy wearing what appears to be an Egyptian necklace.
Next up we have Hobbits. In 2003, scientists found some bones in Indonesia on the island of Flores. These bones belong to small human-like species they named Homo floresiensis, or hobbits. The hobbits were tiny, around 3 feet tall, and were determined to have lived an estimated 50,000 to 100,000 years back. This discovery really changed how we think about our own ancestors. Before, it was believed that only our species, Homo sapiens, had big brains and were smarter than other ancient humans, but the hobbits' small brain challenged that idea. It made us realize that early human relatives were more diverse and interesting than we thought. Some researchers think that the hobbits might have come from an earlier human group and experienced kind of an island dwarfism, adapting to the new environment over time. Small islands can have a weird effect on the animals that live on them, but it's still not 100% known. Finds taught us that the story of human evolution is even more complicated than we thought before. Who knows what other species of ancient humans there could have been roaming around that we still, haven't discovered yet. They could also, of course, be aliens, but I don't actually know. I don't actually think that.
Coming in at number 2, Lovelok Cave. In 1911, miners working in Nevada's Lovelok Cave were digging through piles of guano when they stumbled upon a massive wealth of ancient relics. The miners began searching, and as they sifted through the relics, they found something as exciting as it was confusing: the mummified remains of a 6'6" man with red hair. With this discovery, the cave became an archaeological dig site, and soon even more strange discoveries were being made. Things like 15-inch sandals which appeared to have been used, as well as a giant handprint that was twice the size of any normal handprint. Now, what is extremely incredible about the discovery is that there is an old Paiute legend that talks about red-haired, freckled-faced, man-eating giants who invaded the land and preyed on the Paiute people until they managed to chase the giants into a cave and set it on fire. And some have reason to believe that this archaeological discovery could actually back up the legend. Sadly, the original red-headed mummy has been destroyed, which makes everything a bit more difficult to prove, but one explanation is that the giants could have been a real group of violent European explorers, people who tormented the indigenous peoples and then met their end in Nevada.
The Antikythera Mechanism, a very fascinating archaeological discovery that continues to puzzle researchers to this day. It was found in 1901 off the coast of the Greek island of Antikythera in the wreckage of an ancient ship. The device seems to be this intricate mechanical calculator believed to date back between 150 and 100 BC. Its purpose and origin still not 100% known, but its complexity is pretty astonishing, especially for the time, meaning that more advanced technology could have been present in ancient times that we're completely unaware of. Some researchers think it was used for astronomical calculations or as a calendar, but it's kinda still speculative. What they do know is that the level of craftsmanship and sophistication involved is pretty impressive. It changed assumptions about ancient technology, and despite extensive research, certain aspects of its design and function remain unknown. And we're going to start off the list with a very recent find. This just happened last month, which was February of 2024, for those who may be possibly watching in the distant future. A dude stumbled on a massive ancient Roman artifact in a riverbed. It was found in the gravel of the Torre River in San Vito al Torre. Arvino Silvestri was the one who first spotted the ancient artifact and alerted archaeologists. The riverbank was excavated, and the archaeologists uncovered a massive block of carved limestone, revealing it to be an ancient Roman funeral monument, weighed in at a whopping 13,000 pounds, and it was in pretty good condition. It's so big and heavy that it required an excavator for transportation. Pretty remarkable find, and quite beautiful as well. It has an intricately carved figure of Erotes on one end, holding a torch and a poppy flower. Erotes symbolized various things, including love and death. The decoration style suggested that the monument was from the high imperial era of ancient Rome, but at this point we still don't have an exact date range. At least it hasn't been released to the public yet. Again, this is still a very new find, but this wasn't all they found either. There was also a stone urn, a limestone carving depicting a man's face, and a number of bricks and tile pieces. Next on the list is what I'm just going to call the treasure trove. Now, this news just came out last week at the time of recording this video. Archaeologists in Panama unearthed an ancient burial site filled with treasures at El Caño Archaeological Park. The burial dates back between 750 AD and 800 AD and looks like it must have belonged to an elite lord. The burial revealed the remains of a high-status man who was likely between 30 and 40 when he died. Aside from bones, though, there was a whole bunch of treasure. Breastplates, belts adorned with gold, beads, intricate bracelets, earrings. There were even a pair of crocodile-shaped earrings, which is pretty cool. They also found gold-covered sperm whale teeth earrings. How extravagant is that? Not only do I have a necklace with whale teeth, but I gotta get them coated in gold too. That's not even all they found. They also uncovered bracelets and skirts made from dog teeth, bone flutes, and a bunch of pottery pieces. And on top of all the beautiful stuff this guy was buried with, he was also accompanied by a number of people who were sacrificed. He was incredibly rich, so he was just too above going into the afterlife alone. Next on the list, we have a horrifying pit of severed hands. Apparently severed hands were a big deal in ancient Egypt. Archaeologists made a pretty gruesome discovery when they came across pits filled with severed human hands. They were found during excavations of a palace near the ancient city of Avaris. These pits contained hundreds of severed hands, neatly stacked together, and the largest pit was right in front of the throne room. Researchers believe that these hands were severed from enemies captured in battles or raids. It's not entirely clear why these hands were collected and stored, but there have been images found of soldiers trading severed hands for gold, so some speculate that they might have been offerings to the gods or simply just trophies of victory. Next up, we have the Herxheim Archaeological Site. So back in 1996, during routine excavations, archaeologists came across this pit filled with human remains. Now, that's gotta be alarming even for an archaeologist. I can't imagine you ever get bored with finding human remains, but what made this find even creepier was how these folks had died. They weren't just the remnants of ordinary burials. There were signs that these people had been deliberately and systematically consumed by other humans. The bones all showed signs of butchering. Cut marks indicated careful dismemberment. It looked like these individuals were not just victims of violence, but also of ritualistic consumption. The pit contained the bones of over 500 people, dating back to the Neolithic period. Some suggest these folks were eaten as part of some sort of religious ritual, but other researchers think this may have been more a case of desperation. Possibly there could have been a famine. Next up, we have Neanderthal markings. So the recent discovery of ancient cave markings thought to be made by Neanderthals is obviously pretty exciting. The markings were found on the walls of a cave in central France and are believed to be over 57,000 years old, which would make them the oldest of their kind. The cave was first stumbled upon in 1846 during some quarrying work. It wasn't until 1912 that the archaeological finds started cropping up though, with a discovery of animal bones and tools that had likely belonged to Neanderthals. The cave seemed to have been sealed off from the outside world around 57,000 years ago, which is a hefty chunk of time before modern humans even set foot in the region around 42,000 years ago. So it's a solid bet that the finger marks on the walls were the handiwork of Neanderthals. So what are these markings exactly? They're a series of wavy lines, dots, and faint striations, and it's believed that Neanderthals created these engravings by sweeping and pressing their fingers across a thin line of film on the limestone walls. The height of the markings suggests they were made by taller beings, teenagers or adults, but were they decorative, ritualistic, were they even made intentionally? They're still not sure. Now we head back to Egypt with the discovery of an ancient Roman city in Luxor. The news about this incredible find was announced back in January of 2023. Egyptian archaeologists found a very well-preserved Roman city in Luxor, dating back to the 2nd and 3rd centuries CE. It's now been described as the oldest and most important city found on the eastern bank of Luxor by Mustafa Waziri, head of Egypt's Supreme Council of Antiquities. The archaeological team unearthed a whole whackload of these ancient structures, including residential buildings, offering insights into how people lived during that time. There were also the discovery of 2 pigeon towers used for housing carrier birds, meaning this city was very likely involved in communication networks at the time. There were also metal workshops found in the city that contained whole collections of artifacts of their own, pots, tools, and a collection of bronze and copper Roman coins. Next up, we have the 4,500-year-old tomb. This is another recent 2024 archaeological discovery. I really tried to fill this list up with new stuff. So this discovery was made about 20 miles south of Cairo. Egyptian and Japanese archaeologists stumbled on an ancient Egyptian tomb carved into rock over 4,000 years ago. I always say stumbled on, like these archaeologists are just kind of walking around and they're like, oh, it's an ancient tomb. Obviously, there's more that goes into it than that. It's just the easiest way for my brain to wrap my head around it. They stumbled on it. So anyway, the tomb was carved into rock over 4,000 years ago, dated back between 2649 and 2150 BC. The tomb contained a whole bunch of graves and artifacts from different historical periods. During their excavation, the team unearthed a bunch of treasures. There were human remains buried alongside a vividly colored mask, a burial site from the 2nd dynasty, and an incredibly well-preserved alabaster vessel from the 18th dynasty. In the tomb, there were also 2 terracotta statues depicting the ancient Egyptian goddess Isis and Harpocrates, along with a stela with a man's name encrypted on it, a man named Heroides. I think that's how you pronounce it. You've all heard of the Moai statues on Easter Island before, I know, but just last year, archaeologists found a new one. This new statue adds to the nearly 1,000 that have already been found on the island. This latest statue was uncovered in a dry lake bed, the only one to be found in that location. So far, anyway. The discovery was made by the organization that oversees the island's national park. Terry Hunt, a professor of archaeology at the University of Arizona, was incredibly excited about the find and described how important it is that these statues be retrieved, helping to preserve the history of the Rapa Nui people. So with how much attention and research has gone into the Easter Island statues, why was it that this one was just discovered now? Well, they're saying it's probably because of changes in the area's climate, resulting in the drying out of the lake that was surrounding the sculpture, and they're thinking it probably won't be the last one to turn up. Next, we have another exciting discovery. News about this came out just recently as well. A ton of cool artifacts were found in Brazil. And this one's pretty cool because this stuff was discovered completely by accident. This really was like stumbling on it. So there was a routine construction project going on at an apartment complex, but then construction workers came across a pretty alarming find, human bones, and then more and more stuff started turning up. There were also pottery shards, so these bones weren't recent. Turns out all this stuff belonged to an ancient civilization dating back as far as 9,000 years ago. During excavations, they found thousands of artifacts, and not only that, but these artifacts could possibly reshape the understanding of human settlement in Brazil. The site known as Rosanne's Farm was full of stone tools, ceramic fragments, decorated shells, and bones, which was excavated over the course of 4 years of intense digging. And in total, 43 human skeletons and more than 100,000 artifacts were uncovered. Archaeologists unearthed remnants of a group that existed around 8,000 to 9,000 years ago, meaning that humans moved into the region much earlier than previously believed. The leader of the excavation stated the discovery could, quote, completely change the history of not just the region, but all of Brazil. End quote. This finding may totally change the way we look at the timing and the roots of human migration into the Americas from Asia, which is pretty cool. And we're finishing off the list with the finding of a mysterious Anglo Saxon artifact, again just in January of this year, in Langham, England. A treasure hunter made a pretty cool discovery with a metal detector. It was a small artifact made of gilded silver. It was just under an inch in diameter and 0.3 inches in height. Apparently it dates back to the 8th century. It also has an image of an animal engraved on top, along with Celtic knot-like patterns. Not entirely clear what the object is. The Portable Antiquities Scheme, who are responsible for recording finds like this, noted the thing is similar to other items discovered in the same time period, but this one stands out because of its size and its design. Historian Helen Giak speculated that the spiral pattern on the artifact looked a lot like Celtic designs, and that the animal depicted could be a horse. Definitely what it looks like to me as well. She also praised the craftsmanship, noting that it was created by someone with a keen eye for beauty. And again, I agree, that thing, it looks fantastic. At number 10, we have 125 soldiers. In 2015, a World War I trench that had been covered up since the end of the war was excavated in a small village near the city of Ypres in Belgium. Inside the maze of trenches, archaeologists discovered the bodies of 125 soldiers that had been entombed for 101 years. Some of these soldiers had been as young as 15. The site was known to the Allies back in the war as Hill 80 and had been taken from the Germans in June of 1917, but in 1918 the Germans had taken it back. As well as the bodies, archaeologists also, of course, came across all kinds of relics, helmets, ammunition, watches, religious artifacts, and all of this was discovered right next to people's peaceful country homes, a site the size of 2 whole soccer fields where countless lives were lost in brutal trench warfare. The World War I shell. This next one is a pretty recent discovery. Just back in 2020 in Fort Totten, Washington, D.C., a fascinating piece of history was discovered. During some construction work on a trail through northeast D.C.'s Fort Totten, a shell from World War I was found. It had been exposed after a long period of heavy rain, and as it turns out, it was actually a chemical weapon. The shell contained residue of mustard gas, a highly toxic chemical used in warfare during World War I. This surprising find sparked a lot of concerns about the presence of other chemical weapons in the area, and as amazing as this find was, it was also understandably pretty alarming. Experts have started investigating to ensure the safety of the public. What they discovered is quite intriguing. The shell was just a small part of a larger collection of buried chemical weapons in a neighborhood called Spring Valley. Back in the day, Spring Valley was used as a testing ground for chemical weapons research and development. At number 8 on the list, we have mummified soldiers. In a small town called Peio, a ski resort in the Italian Alps, several disturbing discoveries have been made as glaciers have begun to melt over time, revealing the mummified bodies of soldiers who fought in what was referred to as the White War between Austro-Hungarian troops and the Italian army in the Alps. Most of the bodies were discovered to be relatively well preserved. Probably the most famous case is that of 2 Austrian soldiers who were discovered in 2014. They had been teenagers when they died and had 2 bullet holes in their skulls. It would have been absolute hell just living in the trenches built on these frozen mountains and dealing with the bitter cold, let alone engaging in warfare day in and day out. A lot of them just succumbed to the elements. There were over 80 bodies discovered, but there's no telling how many more are still buried beneath the ice, as thousands upon thousands of lives were lost on both sides. Number 7, barn bomb. This next story takes us to Highland, Perthshire in Scotland, where a startling discovery was made in a barn. In October of 2021, a World War I shell was found in the back of a barn where it had been sitting for decades amongst everyday agricultural equipment. This would have been a really cool discovery, except it was an ordnance device that hadn't been detonated. There isn't a whole lot of information about what led to this discovery, but I imagine it must have been fairly well hidden, because I doubt someone just walked into the barn that day and was like, all right, garden shears, tractor, seeder, World War I explosive, World War I explosive. I start bugging out. What? Anyway, I don't know what that was. Anyway, bomb disposal experts were brought in from Edinburgh Edinburgh who safely destroyed the device. They must have been pretty excited getting to do that too. I definitely want to have watched when that happened. In eastern France in 2012, archaeologists discovered the entombed bodies, 21 German soldiers who were buried alive in trenches when an Allied shell exploded above the tunnel in 1918. The soldiers' remains were found in a shared underground shelter where they had taken cover. The shelter collapsed, trapping them inside and burying them alive. The bodies were found in a crouched position, indicating that the soldiers had tried to protect themselves during the collapse. Some of the men were found wearing their helmets while others were clutching their weapons. They had remained in the exact positions they were in when they died, leading many of the archaeologists to compare the scene to that of Pompeii. So the archaeologists noted that the bodies were remarkably well preserved, with some still having hair and teeth. The preservation was attributed to the soil conditions and lack of oxygen in the trench. The team took DNA samples from the remains to try and identify the soldiers and notify their descendants. In 2022, just off the coast of Virginia, a maritime historian and technical wreck diver by the name of Eric Petkovich made an incredible discovery: a German World War I U-boat. Despite having set out during World War I, it didn't actually sink until 1922, 4 years after the war. It had been taken by the Allies and was getting sent back to the US, but upon arrival at a naval base, it was decided it wouldn't really be of use. So it was just sent out to sea with explosive charges. There were multiple U-boats that sank in American waters, but they were never expected to be found because they were said to have sank deeper than any diver would be able to reach. That is until Eric and his crew came along, who conducted their search in secret. They ended up looking at records of where fishermen had gotten their lines and nets like snagged and stuck, and discovered the wreck, which was 400 feet beneath the sea. Next on the list we have gauntlet daggers. These are just very odd weapons used in World War I. This war took place at an odd time in history because it was after the Industrial Revolution, but not that long after. So you had things like tanks and machine guns, but you also had remnants of the more close and personal forms of weaponry, some of which is stuff that feels like it's right out of the medieval era. Spiked clubs and swords were often used, but another odd weapon was the gauntlet dagger. Yes, this really did exist, and it was used. You'd slide it onto your forearm, and then there was this handle on the inside that you could grab onto and to keep it secure, and then you'd just have this stabbing weapon that also worked a bit like a shield too because of the gauntlet part. It looks like something out of a fantasy movie, but this was totally real. There was a lot of close quarters fighting in World War I because trenches would be raided, and they'd use a variety of close range weapons like this. It would have been absolutely brutal, fighting and dying in a muddy trench filled with rats and stuff just dug out of the ground. Just awful. At number 3, this next story takes us again to the Alps of northern Italy, where melting glaciers revealed the barracks of soldiers who fought in the White War. High in the mountains, artifacts from the war were unearthed from the melting glacier. The objects found in an ice cave shed light on the experiences of soldiers who fought in the high altitude trenches over a century ago. Due to rising temperatures, the glacier has been receding rapidly, revealing a hidden treasure trove beneath its icy surface, and of course remains of bodies as discussed earlier. The items found included weapons, ammo, clothing, and personal belongings of soldiers from different nations who fought in the region during the war. The glacier was a strategic location during World War I, serving as a battleground for Italian and Austrian forces. Soldiers on both sides endured, again, extreme weather conditions and were under constant threat of avalanches. The artifacts provided insights into their daily lives and the hardships that they faced. The artifacts were carefully excavated and documented, and they're currently on display in White War Museum in the nearby town of Peo. Alright, next on the list we have gas masks. Not only was World War I full of brutal trench warfare with a mix of heavy artillery and up close and personal close combat, but it was also the first war to introduce the use of toxic chemicals. World War I gas mask artifacts artifacts with their dark filters and disconcerting eye lenses. They're very haunting looking. Gas masks were just a grim necessity in the face of chemical warfare, an innovation that introduced new levels of terror to the conflict. The masks, designed to protect against toxic gases, have become almost symbols of just the devastating impact of this war. Looking at old photographs, they made the soldiers almost look like monstrous creatures or like faceless kind of ghosts, which really reflects the dehumanizing nature of warfare. They tell stories of the choking gases that seeped into the air. They must have felt like they were just in hell. Beyond their unsettling physical appearance, though, they represent the harrowing experiences of those who face the horrors of chemical warfare. And finally, at number 1, we have 270 German soldiers. In 2021, in the woods on a ridge not far from the city of Reims, France, a father and son made a shocking discovery. The remains of 270 German soldiers from World War I were found by Alain and Pierre Milanowski, 2 local historians. The soldiers were discovered in a network of underground tunnels. The tunnels were constructed by German forces during the war as part of their defensive efforts on the Western Front. The bodies, remarkably well preserved after a century, were found in a complex of underground chambers. The soldiers likely died during a battle in 1917 when the tunnel collapsed due to bombs from the French infantry, cutting off their oxygen supply. It would have taken them days to finally die. 3 men were actually rescued, however. One man, Karl Fisser, writing, "Everyone was calling for water, but it was in vain. Death laughed at its harvest, and death stood guard on the barricade so nobody could escape. Some raved about rescue, others for water. One comrade lay on the ground next to me and croaked with a breaking voice for someone to load his pistol for him."
Did you like these archaeological discoveries? Well, check out this video next. It's about disturbing discoveries that were made in the jungle. Click the video now to find out more. You won't regret it. See you in the next video.